All right, so welcome to the first week of Yes, You Can Write Poetry. And I decided this week to start with one of my favorite poetry forms, which is the ballad. Um, you may be familiar with the whole structure and whatnot of a ballad, but they're fun. Um, and I just want to, go through the ground rules that basically whatever happens here is going to be advertised all over social media. So make sure that you're only sharing what you feel comfortable with. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, that's pretty much the beginning for today. So before we get too much
Cool.
into the whole ballad, we're going to start with a 5 minute sprint to get us kind of geared up for this type of poetry. So we're going to write for 5 minutes on a story, any story. It can be your story, somebody else's story, a fairy tale, any kind of story that you feel excited to tell. And yeah, so then if you're willing, we will do some sharing of the story afterwards. So I'm going to set my trusty little timer here for 5 minutes, and we can just get started writing your story today. We've got a little less than a minute, so you can find a place to wrap up. And then I'm going to give you another minute to just kind of read over what you wrote and just write one little summary statement that says either what you noticed, what you were surprised about. Yeah, and we'll chat in a second. All right, let me know how you when you're all
Okay.
wrapped up. Okay. And just for those of us, those who may be watching, as I wrote in my story, I didn't even introduce myself. I'm Kay Castrotaro, and I'm the founder of Penlight, and I do all kinds of fun things writing. So I use a lot of journaling techniques, but I also teach memoir and poetry writing and do all kinds of process facilitation. I do lots of fun stuff. And Amy and I know each other from other settings, so I did not have her introduce herself either, which is not generally how I begin. Like we'll usually introduce each other and like, say something about one another. So Amy, is there something you would like to say before we start sharing our rights for this class?
Um, just that I'm really excited to do this. It's just a really nice way to just pause and have a break and do something fun and creative. And I start school next week, so I'm glad just to be able to have some time to do something like this.
Oh, great. Well, that's what I want it to be. I want poetry to be fun. So, would you care to read either some of your story or your reflection, right?
Okay, you asked. You'll see. It was a balmy summer day when I walked into the light and heat that I had been avoiding in the basement. You might think finding a cool bit of respite in the basement would be refreshing, but it wasn't. I just spent 4 miserable hours in a class with a teacher who couldn't teach to save his life. It was not a fun day, and it was only a little before noon. I pushed my heavy feet to go forward towards my bus stop while feeling like I was inhaling a glass of water from the air. I stood there annoyed, tired, upset, and awfully hot. That is, until I saw it. The Oscar Mayer Wienermobile.
Oh, and it ends there?
Yeah, that's just
Oh,
where, like you said, I'm like, actually, that's kind of a fun place to end.
it is a fun place to end. And you have me sitting on the edge of my seat saying, what happens next? So-
Right.
and what was your observation after you reread your story?
So this is a true story, and it's just kind of surprising how a small, funny, silly little thing like is so memorable. And I remember it like really changed my mood that day.
Awesome.
Just being a
Awesome.
hot dog car. But
I don't think, oh, maybe once I've seen the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. That's so cool. Well, I love reading your stories, and I'm so glad that you shared that one with us. That was so vivid, and I think it's going to really work well for what we're going to be doing. Because there are only a couple of us, I will share my stuff as well. Mine is not nearly as exciting as yours, because I'm afraid that at this time of night, my creative brain is not as good as it usually is.
I don't know why that popped into my head. So,
Yeah, no
okay.
judgment. Like, don't even
Right.
ask. Like, that's something, and it's going to be really good for what we're doing later. Like, I think there's a lot of fun stuff we can do with that. So, can't wait to do it. All right, mine starts. Once upon a time, there was a poetry class. It started with a facilitator who did not introduce herself, but she did introduce the poem because she loves ballads. She thinks of ballads in movies, Robin Hood and Little John. This story is going nowhere fast. If this were a better story, I'd have a plot line. Characters. At least I have a theme. I am very eager for the end of this story. I feel like I'm writing James Joyce's Ulysses, a story that takes up a lot of space and time and somehow ends up going nowhere. That would be a dreadful ballad. And then I just was like, yeah, this is definitely a stream of conscious, right? I'm much better at doing a journal right at this time of night. But that's okay. This is a judgment-free zone. So you may be asking, why did we start writing a story at the beginning of a poetry class? And the reason is because the type of poetry that we're talking about today, the ballad, is actually a narrative type of poem. So it tells a story. So I thought it might be fun to use a more traditional storytelling technique because sometimes when people are getting new to poetry or they just sit down to write poetry, they get a little stuck right at the beginning and they say, "Oh my gosh, it's a poem. It's got to rhyme. It's got to do this. It's got to do that," which is not at all true. None of those things are true about poetry. But even if you're going to try to do a form where that is true, that can sometimes get in your way. Excuse me. So I wanted to give us some juice to start working with. And if you choose to continue using this story for the rest of the night, that's awesome. I'm really hoping that I don't because I don't want to write about that. I might come up with something different, but at least now we've got some storytelling pieces going. So I am going to share a little PowerPoint that I did, and we're talking the ballad. So, ballad form. The first thing we want to know about ballad is what we've already talked about. It is most often a narrative, so it tells a story, and we will look at some examples or an example a little bit later. But basically, the story that you wrote is a really good topic for a ballad. Ballads are usually designed in quatrains. And so a quatrain, we're going to learn some terminology during this course because it's just fun to learn stuff. Quatrains are basically a stanza of 4 lines. So you have 4 lines that go together and then you have a break and you have another 4 lines, not lanes. That's on the road. There is a rhyme scheme with ballad. So they go A, B, C, B, which for those of you who are not super familiar with ballad or rhyme schemes or poetry, you're already having a panic attack and you're saying, I don't understand. I have to end the line with an A, B, C, B. No, no, you don't. What it means is that the first line is considered line A, and that gets its own word. So if that word is cow, then you want to go, and the next A would have to rhyme with cow. Now, um, if you look at the first form of the rhyme scheme, you don't ever have to rhyme the A line. So that's great. Then you get this B line. So that's the second line. And that line, let's say I'm on farm animals for some reason, so we're going to make it a sheep. All right. So line B is going to be sheep. Great. That means when you get down to line 4, where it says B, you're going to have to rhyme with sheep, sleep. So you have a cow at the end of one line and a sheep at the end of the next line. And then C, that means you get to start a whole new rhyme scheme. So that's a sky because they're looking at the sky. You got a cow, a sheep, a sky, and then you're going to go back to sleep because you rhyme with B, which is sheep. The AB is simpler because you only have to come up with 2 rhyme schemes. So you can do sleep and sheep and cow and now, and you're done with your rhyming. We will see examples of this. So if it feels a little confusing, fear not. I promise we will look at it in more depth. Then we have meter. So a ballad is actually a poem that does have meter. And each set of 2 lines, so the first line and the third line have one set of meter, and then it's like a rhythm. So the first line is going to have what we call iambic tetrameter. And again, you're saying, oh my goodness, what is iambic tetrameter? No worries. Iambic is just a stressed and an unstressed syllable. It's very common in English. Um, in English, actually. So an unstressed would be upon. So an iambic foot, they call it, but an iamb would be like upon. You have a an unstressed syllable, then you have a stressed syllable. And tetrameter just means you got four of those. So I'm trying to think of something that I have. I think I never saw a day. That would be iambic tetrameter. I think I never saw a day. Then the next one would use iambic trimeter. So you would only use three of those sets. So the first one could go, I think I never saw a day as beautiful as now, which is not that, and it doesn't rhyme. So it's an AB. There you go. so, so I'm going to stop for a minute and say, Amy, any questions at this point? Feel free because there are people watching who have questions. I'm sure of it.
Mm. No, I get this. It's more like it just takes time to really think through these things when you're doing them. But
Yes, yes. And so what's going to happen is that we are now going to get our brains into this pattern
Mhm.
because the great thing about ballad is that, and I don't know why ballad is so good at this, but I really feel like a ballad, once you get that rhythm in the meter, it just kind of comes and you can
Mm.
really start to have fun with it. But your brain kind of needs to think in that pattern for a little while. So we are
Mhm.
going to go to a very famous guy. We are going to look at a poem by William Butler Yeats. And I'm going to ask you, can you see this clearly enough, or do I need to make it larger and move it around for you?
I can see it.
Okay, great. And so this is called the Ballad of Father Gilligan. So, for the sake of interest, because nobody wants to listen to me all night, I'm wondering if you would be willing to help me read this. So each of us could do we're going to use our vocabulary. Each of us could do a quatrain or a stanza. So a quatrain, remember again, four, quattro, four lines. So we're going
Mhm.
to do a quatrain. And as we do it, we're going to first just read through and we're going to listen to the rhythm. So I'll do the first quatrain and then you can come along and we'll just go back and forth. Sound good?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
The old priest Peter Gilligan was weary night and day, for half his flock were in their beds or under green sods lay.
Once, while he nodded on a chair at the moth hour of eve, another poor man sent for him, and he began to grieve.
I have no rest, nor joy, nor peace, for people die and die. And after he cried, God forgive, my body spake, not I.
He knelt, and leaning on the chair, he prayed and fell asleep. And the moth hour went from the fields, and the stars began to peep.
They slowly into millions grew, and leaves shook in the wind. And God covered the world with shade, and whispered to mankind.
Upon the time of sparrow chirp, when the moths came once more, the old priest Peter Gilligan stood upright on the floor.
Mavron, Mavron, the man has died while I slept on the chair. He roused his horse out of its sleep and rode with little care.
He rode now as he never rode, by rocky lane and fen. The sick man's wife opened the door. Father, you've come again.
And is the poor man dead? He cried. He died an hour ago. The old priest, Peter Gilligan, in grief swayed to and fro.
When you were gone, he turned and died, as merry as a bird. The old priest Peter Gilligan, he knelt him at that word.
He who hath made the night of stars for souls who tire and bleed sent one of his great angels down to help me in my need.
He who is wrapped in purple robes, with planets in his care, had pity on the least of things, asleep upon a chair.
Okay. So I love this poem. I actually had never read it until I was researching for this class and
Mm,
looking for the right type of poem. And
mhm,
as you will see, there are some points where the iambic da 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 feel actually ends up going da da da. So it has like a couple of unstressed syllables, and that is totally okay because we're writing poetry. So, the idea with poetry is yes, we have a form, and sometimes we have a form, and we
mm,
work with that form, but the form is not the greatest good in poetry. The message is. And so if you need to mess with it a little bit to make things work, and I always love these older English ones, like 5 in the fifth stanza where it says they slowly into millions grew and leaves shook in the wind and God covered the world with shade and whispered to mankind, and you say, wait a minute, mankind does not rhyme with wind. They're supposed to
mm,
rhyme, but they're spelled the same. and
mm,
and they were okay with that in Old English, or they would pronounce it a little bit differently to kind of make it fit. So again, that gets into slant rhyme, but we're not going to talk about that today. So, you know, just to let you know that there's a lot of freedom. I totally love this story because you've got this old father and he's like trying to take care of his parish, and he feels like all he does is bury people. He's like
mm,
half of them are in their beds sick and the other half are dead. And it almost feels like it's written like in a time of plague or something like, or um he's Irish, so like the Irish potato famine or something like that, where people are dying of starvation all the time. And he's just so tired of constantly going and giving people the last rites and then burying them that when he gets called to go to this other place, he's like, I just can't. Like, I don't want to do this. And then he falls asleep. And
mm,
when he wakes up, all of a sudden he has this shock and he's like, oh my gosh, this guy probably died while I was asleep. And and the wife is like, "Well, yeah, he died, but you'd already visited him." And he says, "Oh my gosh, God sent an angel to take my place and to act like I came, and that God cares even for these poor fathers who are tired of serving people." So I love this poem. Besides, so it tells a great story. It's got some supernatural stuff in it, which is also very typical of older ballads. Um, yeah. So if we want to just kind of look at the first one, we can look at that rhyme scheme a little bit. So the old priest Peter Gilligan, so Gan is going to be that A, was
mhm,
weary night and day. So that's your B.
mm,
For half his flock were in their beds. Okay, that doesn't rhyme with the first one or the second. So that's a C. Or
mhm,
under green sods lay. And that goes back to your B to rhyme with D.
mhm.
So what I'm going to do is that as we write our ballads, I'm going to leave this up because then you can look and get a sense of what the rhyme scheme is, and you can also kind of read it to yourself and hear the meter. So, I guess I want to ask if you want to look at any more examples or if you feel pretty comfortable with this, and if we want to go to the writing part of it and see what we can do.
I'd be okay with moving ahead.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to do.
Okay.
So my initial thought when I designed this was that we can take the story that we started writing as a regular old prose narrative and convert that into a ballad. So if you're willing to do that, you can start looking around and maybe pulling out some little phrases that go in that da 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 meter,
Mhm.
and then maybe looking at some rhyme schemes, and maybe let's play around and do like let's do one quatrain and see how we go. And then we can sit and talk about what's working, what isn't working. So I look at these sessions as being something where we can really just kind of hash it out together and kind of do a little workshop thing. So
Mhm.
how does that work for you? Are you
Yeah,
feel
let's do it.
all right, let's do it. So I will take this crappy old poem that I wrote because you know what? Even crappy stories can make good poems. So
Mhm.
I'm going to give us maybe 15 minutes, I think. Should I,
Okay.
maybe I'll give us, yeah, I'll give us 15 minutes. If you finish your first quatrain or you're struggling, um, if we were doing this in a class, like with more students, I would have you put in questions in the chat so that I could see those and I could just pop up and answer them. Because it's just the two of us, feel free to jump out with something. And if you have a phrase and you're like, how would I mangle this? How do I say this? We can workshop it together. So go ahead. I think I might pause us for a minute. I know I said I'd give us 15 minutes, but
Okay.
I think I'm going to pause because I've got a couple of stanzas, and so I'm wondering if you've got a couple of quatrains as well. One
No, I have 30% of a uh
of a stanza.
stanza. Yeah.
So we're looking like a line.
A line and two words.
So, okay, so let me read what I've got, and then we'll listen to what you've got, and maybe we'll see if there's something that's sticking you. Because remember, this is not going to be great poetry, okay? And one of the lovely things about doing a workshop like this, and actually I might just stop sharing this for a minute so we can all look at each other and not just be, okay, did that stop? Can you see me now?
Uh, no, it's still up.
Oh, well, we don't want to do that. Stop this for a minute. Stop. Stop sharing you. Okay. Oh, look at that. So, for a minute here, I want to just kind of play around with what we've got because when we're doing a workshop like this, there can be a huge temptation to really have to make beautiful poetry. Like it's got to be perfect. And it's actually probably sometimes helpful to just try to write yucky poetry and then go back and, revise it at another time. Excuse me. This is my approach. I mean, I tend to do a lot of revising of any of my work. And the poetry book that I released had hours and hours and days of revisions and multiple revisions. Like my editor went through that. My editor read that at least twice completely, and I did revisions based on his feedback twice. So that's not counting the revisions I did when I was writing. Like I do
Mhm.
a lot of revising. Some poets don't, I do.
Mhm.
So I'm going to show you what happens when we take that story that I wrote and kind of start turning it into a little bit of a ballad.
Mhm.
There was a poet teaching a class on ballad form and style. No introductions did she give, she jumped in with a smile. Why take up time with names of folk when poetry was there? A rose by any other name would still attract some stares. So, okay, great poetry? No. Is it telling a story? Yes. Is it using the meter? Yes, more or less. Even that first line, there was a poet teaching a class where I kind of like stuck the ing together as a unstressed syllable. And I finished the first stanza and then looked back and said, "Oh, I forgot about my rhyme scheme." And I had to come up with a way to rhyme style. Silly girl, which is why we're smiling. So that's what I've got. Share with us what we've got and tell me how you're feeling about the process.
Okay. I have the heat, the sun came shining down from out the basement. And then I'm gonna need one word there to meet the trimeter. But
Ah,
that's all I have.
okay. I'm listening to that and I'm saying from out the basement dark or cool or something like that.
Well,
So
that's why you're the teacher.
silly you. No, but I'm saying you've got a really good picture going on there. So yeah, let's go back to writing then and keep playing with it, right?
Okay.
Are there any things that you're feeling stuck with that you feel like you would benefit from a little bit of support? Or I mean, I like what you've got. I like how you're doing it. You're setting the stage. Um,
No, I wouldn't say it's just I'm really rusty with meter right now. So like and then plus just rhythm is something that doesn't come naturally to me. So
hmm,
it's just taking me a lot more time, but that's okay. It's
yeah,
just
no,
I'm not gonna be able to
absolutely.
produce a lot right now,
And
but
you don't have to. That
yeah.
I love the fact that because see, I'm a musician. And so
Hmm.
for me, meter is something that comes very easily for
Hmm.
me. And this, like I said, this form of poetry, I'm like da 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 da
Hmm.
da. And I sit here with my fingers and I go da 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 da, and I love it. So this is a great example of how different writers have different strengths and different areas that we've worked on more. So, all right, so we're going to go back to writing, and then I'm going
Sure.
to share a ballad that I wrote a long time ago just because I can.
Cool.
So,
It's your class.
that's right, I can do whatever I want.
Right.
Okay, back we go.
Cool. right, we got a stanza.
You startled me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, no, it's great. Okay, read it to me. I want to hear it.
Okay. Okay. The heat, the sun came shining down from out the basement dark as I emerge with saddened frown and restless heavy heart.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. That's
Well, it took
great.
long enough. You should.
You. All right, let me ask you something. When was
Yeah.
the last time you wrote poetry?
Seriously, probably about 5 years ago.
Okay, so 5 years ago. And when was the last time you wrote poetry that had a meter that you had to follow?
Well, uh, 5 years ago, I was really into meter because I was substitute teaching English, so I was teaching it to the kids.
Ah,
Um,
so you were doing lots of meter and rhyme back then.
yeah, I was really like that. I had a flow then.
Oh,
Then I,
oh, wait a minute. Stop right there. You had a
yeah,
flow then. You had a flow then because it was something you were doing on a regular
exactly.
basis. So you're coming into this, like, first of all, you really even didn't know what the topic was because I didn't do a whole lot of, talking about which poems. I was going to start with things very, very like shorter and more basic. Like I was going to start with haiku and limerick and that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But I figured I'd jump in because it's the two of us and we'd go into ballad a little bit more. So
Sure.
so you were thrown into something that you haven't done in 5 years, and you're using all of these skills that are skills. And so they do get a little bit rusty and they go to the back of you know, I wrote a poetry book last year. So poetry is something that I've been working a lot with. And let me tell you, this is not something that I'm going to put in a poetry book. I mean, it's just not going to happen.
Mhm.
Um, so no, I think that's a beautiful start. And I would challenge you over the next week. Like it would be so great if you come back, if you were to come back and say, "Hey, this is the ballad that I wrote based on this." Like, how cool would that be to have, or email it to me. You don't have to come back to a class, but I mean, I would love to
Mhm.
have you. But um, yeah, so I want to share one that may actually eventually go into a poetry book. I'll see what my
Cool.
editor thinks about it. But this one was written back in 1999, and I have not, um, I really haven't done anything with it
Mhm.
lately. Like, yeah,
Kind of cool you still have it. Or, I mean, it is cool you still have it.
I keep everything. It's
Mm.
it's I am such a pack rat and I just keep all of my writing. I mean, I have a student's writing from 20 years ago, 30 years ago. How long ago was I teaching? And whose name shall remain nameless. But got her writing in my, like, I keep everything. And when it comes to writing, I definitely like to stash this stuff because it's something that you never know what you're going to be able to do with a piece of writing. Like I'm a firm believer that you can always take something from old
Mhm.
writing and revise it. And
Mhm.
this one I wrote in 1999 because well, it was part of a course to do a ballad. We had to do a ballad, but I wrote it about my great grandfather, who had died just a couple years before that. And I had stayed with him the
Mhm.
summer before he died. So I had a really interesting relationship with him. Like it had gone from being his great granddaughter who would run into the house all the time because they lived right there on the farm with us to becoming like his caretaker and, cleaning his colostomy bag and, all kinds of things that great grandkids don't often do with their great grandfather. And it was a really beautiful experience. So when he passed, I had a really, again, I had really complicated feelings about it because it was losing a great grandfather, but it was also losing somebody that I had been a caretaker for. So this was one of my ways of processing this. So if you don't mind, we can read this the same way that we did the other one, just go back and
Sure.
forth. I know that you're reading this totally cold, but it's Gramps' song because we called him Gramp. In
Mm.
1899 was born a child his folks named James. His middle name Augustus was, his surname simply Dame.
This child grew up a farmer's son on fair Rhode Island soil. He milked the cows and tilled the ground and hauled the crops to sale.
The time flew by and James was wed to Effie Peterson. Of their 6 children, 5 survived, 3 girls and 2 strong sons.
The 30s came and prices fell, and James, some lessons learned. You must work hard for all you get, and cash should not be spurned.
Among the trials the 60s brought, the state his farm did take. But James his home refused to quit. His land he'd not forsake.
Persistence pays, he knew full well. The state at last gave in. Old James could work the land he loved if he would pay them rent.
So James remained in his dear home the rest of his long life. From there he buried Effie Dame and watched his children leave.
For 97 years he lived, till New Year's 96. Then in the house where he was born, his heart beating, his heart its beating ceased.
Make no mistake, no saint was he, my great grandfather, Gramp. He gruff and surly often was, and sometimes quite a grump.
But who could blame him for some flaws? I too can claim my own. Important only stands the fact that he was my flesh and bone.
Yeah. So that was my processing through my grandfather's life and,
Mhm,
you know, looking at that. And there are some points I said we'd mentioned slant rhyme a little bit,
mhm,
and there are some actual, I was like, oh, I did use slant rhyme in this. So like the bottom of the second column where it says persistence pays, he knew full well the state at last gave in. Old James could work the land he loved if they would pay him rent. So in and rent are not a true rhyme. They're actually considered a slant rhyme because they have like a similar internal sound with the N coming at the end.
mhm,
That's that slant rhyme is taken from Emily Dickinson, who says make it rhyme, but make it rhyme, but say it slant, I think is how she says it. And
mhm.
so slant rhyme is like we wanted a little off kilter. So you can have that all and soil and sail. That was another one where it was like a slant rhyme because it's
Mhm.
similar. You've got the S and the L, and you can kind of make it feel like it rhymes.
Yeah.
So that is, another take on a ballad. So we have one that shares my life story. We've got the Father Gilligan, which is kind of, you know, fictional with some spirituality going in it. We've got your ballad that's being taken. It is a ballad. It's coming. It's coming. Don't give me that look.
No, no, it's more like, well, this is spiritual and this is a hot dog story. You know.
What I was gonna say is that yours is a piece of memoir, which using poetry as a form of memoir is a completely legitimate form of memoir. So you're using a story, and then I'm like, then I have this, whatever you want to call this, about like teaching a poetry class online. So we are coming right about down to the end. I want to thank you for coming, and I want to ask if you've got a takeaway. So I like to do takeaways at the end of a session, so we kind of can say what did I learn, or what did I get out of this? What did this mean to
Mm.
me?
Actually, I would say it was just really refreshing. The one of the things I really like about poetry is kind of the puzzle nature to it of trying to figure out words and make them fit. And so like I actually, even though it takes time, I like working through that. Um, as like I yeah, it's like a fun puzzle.
Yes, and I will agree with that 110%, says the woman who bought herself a puzzle and finished it
Mm.
for Christmas.
Mm.
My Christmas present to myself was a puzzle. So I also really enjoy that. And I noticed when I was writing this one that, I started and I put oh, I'm still sharing. Silly screen. Sorry.
Of
Like
course.
I started writing rhyming words here and then crossing them
Mm.
off just to and I was like, I know that if I were actually writing this poem, I would be sitting there with the online thesaurus and
Yeah.
I'd be looking through and I'd be looking at rhyming dictionary and all that kind of stuff. And that is some of the fun of poetry. So,
Mhm.
yeah, and my takeaway is just that I really love poetry. I love story and I love ballad because it takes story, poetry, and it mushes it all together in a way that can be really memorable. And I also feel like it's a really good entryway into other types of poetry because it does kind of get our brains thinking a little bit in the
Mhm.
rhyme and the meter thing. Um, so thank you for joining me.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
all of you who are watching us out here, thank you for joining us as well. And hopefully we'll get to see you in the future with, yes, you can write poetry.
Definitely with a finished ballad.
Will you send it to me when it's done? Because I want to
Will
see.
do.
All
Will
right.
do.
Have a great night. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good to see you again.
You too.
Take
Bye.
care.